Welcome everyone to Mishnah in-depth Eduyot with Dr. Yitz Landes. This class is part of Drisha's Rifka Rosenwein Mishnah Division and is sponsored in her memory by her families. This class is part of Drisha's ongoing series following the Mishnah Yomit schedule, where we are assuming you are learning mishnayot following the Mishnah Yomit schedule independently, and we're coming together once a week to review, to look at more things in depth, to ask questions, and more. For the past several weeks, we've had the pleasure of learning with Dr. Landes from the JTS, and it's been a great couple of weeks, and we're glad to keep going. Thank you, everyone who could make it here on the busy time of Erev Pesach, and we're glad to hear and see you. Sources for today's class will be shared on screen by Dr. Landes. And with that, I'd like to hand things over to you. So, Great. Everybody, good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for that, Kayla. Hi. So we are continuing with Eduyot, and last time we left off kind of in the middle of chapter 4, which is just a discussion, a list of moments in which Beit Shammai is more lenient than Beit Hillel, which is not usually the case. It's not always obvious, I think, what exactly is the more lenient position. So it's also interesting to have that framing and to think of that dichotomy between more lenient and less lenient. I think like that is oftentimes how we think about a halachic decision, whether it's a lenient one or a not lenient one. It doesn't always work so perfectly. So it's interesting also, I think, as we look through some more examples, to think, well, what exactly is making it more lenient? Who is it more lenient for in the situation if it involves multiple parties? And then also just the broader question of what is this all doing here? Is the material, again, original to Tractate Eduyot, or is it being collected from elsewhere in the Mishnah and brought here? And what is the organizing principle? Why is this material here? So just kind of, that's, I think, a more relatively easier question to answer. What is the organizing principle? It's a chapter. Actually, we're going to see 2 chapters today, which is designed to just kind of collect all these places in which they have a more lenient opinion of Beit Shammai, as opposed to that of Beit Hillel. So I'm going to share my screen. And as mentioned, if you want to stop me to ask, please do. The specifics of these mishnayot is not easy. As we see, this is a truly difficult tractate. And again, this requires that we are familiar with halacha concepts from all over the place. I could say that I remember many years ago when I was in yeshiva and someone next to me was studying the entire Mishnah. They gave me the tip to study this tractate last, after you have already studied the entire Mishnah, because of its assumptions about how much you know about other areas of halacha. But I think for the purposes of Mishnah Yomit, we can get through this and it'll be beneficial. It'll be good for us. So I should say a few more programmatic notes. Today, we're really going to focus on getting through the material. It's a lot to get through. I'm not going to do quite as much of the what we call higher criticism, trying to really suss out where the sources come from. And I'll say that next class, which is our last class on Chol HaMoed Pesach, we actually have more than a week's full of material to get through. But I do want to get through it, or at least summarize it without going through it in detail, so that I could spend some of the time really doing a summary of the wider phenomenon that is this tractate and what we've seen here. So if today is very detail heavy, next week will be less detail heavy and a bit more zoomed out, bigger picture. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Great. Okay, so we are in the middle of chapter 4, cases in which Beit Shammai is more than Hillel. I'm not going to read these ones out loud, but we saw already 5 mishnayot of this form. We saw them disagree about an egg, which is born on Yom Tov, on a holiday. Could happen maybe next week if you have a chicken and you're home on Pesach. We have the same situation with an animal that was born on Yom Tov. We also have a situation in which someone kills an animal on Yom Tov, and the laws surrounding whether we can cover up the dirt, cover up the blood using dirt or not. A lot of this has to do with the principle of muktzeh, right? Which halachot which have to do with using things which were not totally ready for Yom Tov or Shabbat, also in this case Yom Tov, that one must have all these items that one wants to use over the course of the holiday ready before the outset of the holiday, and also mentally be prepared to use them over the course of the holiday. So that's kind of the first chunk of cases between them, which we saw last week. And then we continue, we also saw examples that have to do more with actually things that have to do with agricultural law, right? So if one wants to get out of tithing in some way, and also whether things actually belong to poor people based on to what extent they might have actually been forgotten in the field or not. And we see that there's a few cases when Beit Hillel is actually more lenient, and lenient in that case means that it actually, the things that were left behind still belong to the owner of that field. It's a bit easier for the owner to actually maintain control of their produce. So that's the leniency there. The leniency has to do with being nicer, I guess, so to speak, or being easier on the owner of the field. In the prior mishnayot, Hillel was more lenient. Hillel was more lenient in that they did not really think that these things were mukta. Several things which they listed, which Beit Shammai thought was mukta, and therefore not permissible to use on Yom Tov or to do on Yom Tov, whereas Beit Shammai said that it was permissible. And it ends here also with this complicated situation of Kerem Revai, the fruit or the produce of the fourth year, and whether it's like the produce of the second year, which is what the rabbis generally say. So it is like the produce of the second year. Beit Hillel says it's entirely like it, and Beit Shammai says it's not entirely like it. Given that it's not entirely like the produce of the second year, the owner of the field has a bit more leeway with what they can do with that produce. Let's continue now in the agricultural realm. And the question is a chavit shel zeitim mugulgalim, pickling olives. Or basically, there's another verb for pickling olives. What does one do with olives? Prepares olives, cures olives. Beit Shammai omrim, eno tzarich lenakev, ubeit Hillel omrim, tzarich lenakev. Umodim she'im nikva, ustamu hashmarim, shehi to'ora. So when one has olives in a jar, or in a, I guess this is not a jar, it's a jug or some kind of wood jar in this fashion, the oil, technically speaking, be what allows, or basically the water in the jug is what allows the food inside to contract impurity, right? But in order for that fluid or that liquid to create a situation in which the food can now contract impurity, the owner has to want the fluid to be there. Okay. So if the water is in there, the salty water, I guess that's like the brine, so to speak, I guess, of the olives. Beit Shammai says that you don't really want to use or to eat the brine. It's just there for some kind of other purpose, basically to prepare the food for being edible. In which case, you don't have to signify by making a hole in the jug that this is not really something that you want to be there. Because according to Beit Hillel, you have to actually show to whomever, I don't really know, but you have to kind of somehow express that it is not your desire for the oil or the water to be there forever. And therefore you have to make a hole. And that kind of shows that you do not want to eat the olives with the water. You just want it to help prepare the olives to be edible. And once you show that, therefore the water cannot help the olives become impure. Okay? Highly, not a situation we necessarily get to that often, but it is a situation nonetheless in halacha, which they argue about. But they do agree in one case. Beit Hillel agrees with Beit Shammai that if one made a hole in this container, in this jug, in this barrel that holds the olives with the water, and then it got filled up, it got clogged by the dregs, that is not considered to be a closing of the hole. That therefore the owner's intention is still apparent that they do not want to eat the olives with the oil, with the water, but rather that it is simply there to help kind of brine the olives, and therefore that the olives are still pure and have not become accessible to impurity or possibly impure because of their touching or their intermingling with the water itself. Just a few lines, but complicated stuff. So I guess we could say that since we spoke about olives, we now continue to talking about oil in general, probably understanding being that it's olive oil, which one would use to clean themselves. So hasach b'shemen tahor v'nitama, yirad v'taval. So if someone cleanses their body, kind of covers themselves, does themselves with olive oil as part of their just kind of hygienic practice, and that oil is pure, but then it becomes impure. If they go down and immerse themselves in the mikvah, Beit Shammai says, immerse themselves in water. Beit Shammai says, Afal pishuhu minatef tahor, even though there is still oil on their body, and the oil is necessary for making someone impure, even though you already cleansed yourself, you still have oil on yourself. Beit Shammai says that oil, you don't really want it to be there, right? This isn't the oil that you have in mind. It's not enough oil or not enough intentionality around that oil to allow it to create a person or make a person impure. One second. If there is that much oil there, in order to cover up one small limb, that is enough in order to make someone impure. Okay. That's the whole situation if the oil is pure in the first place and it becomes impure. But if it is impure, if the oil was always impure and the person covers himself with it. If he then puts himself in mikvah and there still is enough of that impure oil on him to cover up a small limb, then that person is pure. But hey, Eduyot says mashke tofeh. It has to be that one impresses their hand on their body and it comes off and there is oil. If there's that much oil on that person, then they are impure. Yehuda has a different interpretation of what Beit Hillel says in this disagreement. They have to touch their hand on the body, take off a moist hand, a hand that's covered in oil, and there still needs to be enough oil on it to touch something else and to impart oil onto that thing. If there is that much oil, then they are impure. So essentially, the leniency here is that Beit Shammai is less strict about whether that person continues to be impure or not. And also one thing which you could see here is that there already is this understanding, or there are disagreements about what Beit Hillel's opinion is, right? So we have this anonymous list of disagreements in which Beit Shammai is considered to be more lenient, but we see that there already is here, Rabbi Yehuda says, a different thing in the understanding of Beit Hillel. So we are kind of sensing that there might also be additional understandings of what this list of leniencies and stringencies is between the two of them. A woman becomes betrothed, either in the amount of a dinar or in the amount of that's equal to a dinar, according to Beit Shammai. By a pruta and the value of a pruta. This is less, actually. So what's the leniency? The leniency, I guess, is that it's for the benefit of the woman that she's worth more money. It's hard to know exactly how much this is, but essentially it's a very small amount of money. Okay. Continuing in laws of marital issues. Beit Shammai omrim, poteru et ishto v'get yashan, u'Beit Hillel osrin. Ezu get yashan, kol sheni techid ima achar shektavo la. So Beit Shammai says that one could divorce their wife using an old get. Beit Hillel forbids that. But what is an old get? A get doesn't mean that it's that old. It could be a day old, a few hours old. But the matter at hand is that someone wrote the bill of divorce for their wife, but before he gave it to her, they again were in one room secluded together. So given that happened, there might be an assumption, this is the assumption of Beit Hillel, that perhaps they engaged in some kind of marital relations, therefore rekindling the marriage. But according to Beit Shammai, we don't worry about that, and the leniency is such that I guess it's for the benefit of the husband, or maybe for both of them if they want to get divorced, that they don't have to then go make a new get. So actually, I guess really is more of a leniency for the husband in this case. A similar case comes up right now. So if someone divorces their wife, and then they stay together in an inn, so even though they already were divorced, and then they stayed somewhere together, and there might be an assumption that they engage in some kind of sexual relations, which would actually create a new situation of marriage, because that is also one form of betrothal. Beit Shammai says they do not need to write a new get. There's actually no need to think that is the case, that they might have done that. We might assume that actually they did engage in relations and that they therefore de facto got married, and therefore there must be a need for a new get. Ematai, when is this situation talking about? What's it talking about? Bizman shanitgarsha min hanisuin. Okay, this disagreement has to do with once they were divorced from marriage. If they were divorced from engagement, merely engagement, so I'm not sure how exactly they come to this conclusion, but what Beit Hillel would say in this case, if they were divorced from merely engagement and not from betrothal, so they were less married, they do not need to make a new get, even though they were together in the same inn, because literally, mipnesha eni bo gaspa. What's a good translation of that? I saw one right here. He's not yet, I guess, familiar with her. Okay, they seemingly haven't had sex yet if they only were engaged and not married, and therefore they are supposedly less likely to have engaged in sexual relations again, and thus there is no need for a new get, neither according to Beit Shammai or even in this case according to Beit Hillel. It's the whole disagreement is only if they were divorced from marriage and not divorced from engagement. Okay, the preparatory stage before marriage. Again, the assumption here is that we know a lot about both, in this case, marital law, divorce law, and prior to that, that we know already a lot about different aspects of purity law. And if you thought purity law was complicated, and if you thought marriage law was complicated, wait till you get to Levirate marriage law, which is what we're up to now. We have a few cases of that here, which I'm going to try and go through a bit slowly because it could be a bit confusing at times, and sometimes it's helpful diagram. I don't think this is too complicated yet, but we'll see. Beit Shammai mitzilin et hatzarot la'achim, uBeit Hillel osrin. Okay. Kaltsu, Beit Shammai postin min kehuna, Beit Hillel machshirin. Let's just pause for a second. Beit Shammai mitzilin et hatzarot la'achim, uBeit Hillel osrin. So hatzarot, so levirate marriage, right? Let's say somebody marries a woman, and he passes away before she has a child. That person's brother then needs to marry her in order to create children for his brother, or they could get out of that whole situation by performing chalitza. So if it actually happens, that's called yibum. If it doesn't happen, it's called chalitza, special ritual. See in Tractate Yevamot, which I guess those who are doing Mishnah Yomit have already studied. And if Eduyot is a difficult chapter, Yevamot is a difficult tractate. Yevamot is also one of the more difficult ones. So the tzarot, though, are the wives who are married to that initial person who passed away. What is their status, right? So these are, I guess you can call them rival wives, or the person is married to more than one person. And the problem in this case is that you have two brothers married to two sisters. The person who passes away also has additional wives, okay? So the person who passes away, before providing children to either of these wives, his brother can't marry wife A because she is the sister of his own wife, okay? But there's also a second wife of his brother who just passed away, who isn't the sister of his own wife. Beit Shammai says that a second wife, who isn't a sister of his brother's wife, is permitted to his brother. But Beit Hillel says, given that one of the wives is forbidden to his brother because he is the sister of his current wife, also the other wife of his brother is forbidden to him. One wife is forbidden to his brother, all the wives are forbidden to his brother. Okay? Even a lot more of these crazy examples, and then wait till you get to the Bavli and the Babylonian Talmud, there's even more of these theoretical questions. But if they have performed chalitza, right? If they did do chalitza in this situation, which means that they have a special ritual which kind of absolves them from having to perform levirate marriage, from performing yibum. Beit Shammai poslin min hakehuna, uBeit Hillel machshirin. Okay, because this person actually was permissible to his brother, according to Beit Shammai. If they do chalitza, if they do this special thing, that ritual, that means that she is no longer allowed to marry a Kohen because the one who does that is not allowed to marry a priest. But Beit Hillel machshirin, Beit Hillel says that they actually are allowed because they never actually even should have done a chalitza in the first place. The situation was such that the second they got into it, after his brother passed away, the whole thing was basically null and void. There's no need to do chalitza, and therefore also she's permissible to a Kohen because a widow is permitted to a Kohen. Nityamu, Beit Shammai machshirin. But if they performed yibum, meaning that he did marry her, Beit Hillel, and then the second brother passed away as well. So we have, think about it one more time. We have a woman whose co-wife, sister, is married to her new husband. Okay? If that husband then passes away, she is just a widow for all intents and purposes, and therefore is allowed to marry a priest. Ubeit Hillel poslin does not think that that person is allowed to marry a priest, because when she married her new husband, it wasn't through yibum, it was actually through just marriage in general. And that was not something which had been permissible for her. Okay. This is actually like a beautiful end of the Mishnah. complicated, difficult stuff until now, but the ending is actually really, really nice and kind of worth it for its general statement about rabbinic law. Even though these three people say that they've forbidden, these people say that it's allowed. So even though they have these really fundamental disagreements about marital status, which could lead to situations in which one person would end up marrying people who they do not think actually should legitimately be allowed to marry to. Beit Shammai did not never stop themselves from marrying women from the house of Beit Hillel, and Beit Hillel did not stop themselves from marrying women from the house of Beit Shammai. So they still actually married within each clan. It kind of gives you a sense that these are some kind of big families. You don't actually know the size, but it gives you a sense that these are specific, actual kind of like movements with followers. Even though these movements disagreed about issues of marital status, they still had enough respect for each other and for their opinions that they allowed themselves to marry across these divides. Not just marriage, but also other cases as well. And even though there are all these significant differences about purity and impurity between the two houses of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, they still did not stop themselves from engaging in things which would require certain laws of purity. Essentially, what that means is they still ate each other's house, right? They disagreed in the Beit Midrash. They said, what you're doing is not kosher or not pure. But in the end, there was enough agreement that they still allowed themselves to go and eat at each other's homes on each other's utensils and dishes. Okay. So fascinating kind of ending, I think, also that conversation, to think that we have all these significant differences. In some senses, also, I feel like it's kind of odd because we may not perceive them to be such significant differences, but this is a lot of what their rabbis talk about, are these like highly complicated situations. So therefore, it's clear that for them, it was really important. And we'll see the dynamic again also in the next chapter, where some of these differences might seem like esoteric areas of halacha, but for the rabbis are extremely, extremely important. They're like really living them. And here, even though they're really living these differences, they still allow themselves to kind of maintain society with one another across the difference. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that. Okay. Now that we had that nice little statement about the differences in their philosophies, but their continued kind of camaraderie, let's look at another complicated case of levirate marriage. Okay? Shloshachim. There's three brothers. Shnayim mehem nisuin l'shtei achayot ve'achad mufneh. There's three brothers. Two of them are married to sisters. And one brother is mufneh. Well, one brother is available, literally what it means in Hebrew. Right? So if one of the brothers dies without having kids with his wife, and the single brother, asaba mu'umal, right? So he kind of gives her, technically speaking, in like the biblical law, you don't have to actually kind of have some kind of engagement. You just kind of have yibum, and that's it. But if he kind of does this kind of level of engagement with her, so they aren't fully married yet, but they are about to be married because they almost did the yibum after the brother died without kids, and the sister's about to marry the brother, but they did this kind of preliminary form of engagement. But at that moment, the other brother also died, who was married to the same sister, so the sister of the person who was about to get married to the third brother. So we have a situation in which the sole surviving brother, technically speaking, now needs to marry sisters, which is not permissible. But so far, he has already engaged one of the sisters. Beit Shammai omrim, ishto imo v'hala titzeh mishum achot isha. The woman with whom he already has the ma'amar, this kind of active engagement, he will marry her. And the other one was just kind of absolved or out of the whole category of yibum and chalitza, because doing one of those things would enter the situation of possibly one person being married to two sisters, which is not permissible. Okay? He must now, to cover all his bases, give the woman with whom he has this kind of engagement both a get and also perform chalitza, and must absolve or get rid of the situation with the sister whose husband just died by performing chalitza, right? So there's actually a lot more things that has to happen. He doesn't end up staying with either woman at all, even the one that he already had kind of engaged, whose husband died first. Zohi Sha'amru. And now they bring some kind of saying, which I guess they kind of said in the world in the second century, or in the first century even. I lo al ishto v'i lo al eshet achiv. Some kind of statement that is he wasn't get neither his wife nor the wife of his brother. Does fit in this context, but it does seem like because of this statement Zohi Shamru that it sounds more kind of some kind of this like almost folkloristic or some kind of saying which has existed in society, which I said actually applies to this specific halachic concept as well. So what's the leniency here, right? Leniency is that Beit Shammai, first of all, doesn't require all these ceremonies and rituals, but also the leniency, I think, is understood to be that this third brother actually gets to have a marriage, and also that I think for the wife, it was understood to be a leniency in that at least one of them, the first wife, whose husband died first, the first sister, that is, still comes out married, right? So I think that's the understanding of leniency is that there's less ritual involved here, less to do, but also primarily even that these two people get to be married. That's the leniency here. It might seem like a requirement that one must get married, but it's actually perceived, I think, by the rabbis and of course also in the biblical context of being something which is a good thing, right? These folks want to help each other in terms of marriage and such, and the creation of offspring. Okay, so it's interesting how there's another case here of marital issues. Right? So if one takes a vow not to have sexual relations with his wife, even though they are legally required to, that this only really works for 2 weekends. But at that point, the vow is invalid because one is obligated to engage in sexual relations with their wife. That after already 1 week, the vow is null. And again, the question of leniency here, right? So who's it being lenient towards? In this case, it's being lenient towards the husband. That's the understanding of leniency. That Beit Shammai is even allowing him to go 2 weeks without providing intercourse. Okay. Let's continue. This is a different case. Okay. Someone who miscarries within 81 days. So in the Bible, if a woman has a daughter, they must then offer a sacrifice after 80 days. If in that time, and also separately from that, if a woman has a miscarriage, she also needs to bring a sacrifice as well. The question is, what happens if in between the 80 days prior to offering the sacrifice for the birth of the daughter, there is a miscarriage? But here, it isn't just within that, it's at the very, very last moment, right? Ol Shmonim V'Achad, Ol, the night, light, means kind of like the eve. So we'll say like, also in the context of Pesach, this comes up, Or L'Arba'asar, like the night before Pesach. So Or L'Shmonim V'Achad, the night before the 81st day, the sacrifice for the birth of the daughter should be offered on the 81st day. Let's say that evening, the woman unfortunately has a miscarriage. Understanding being, if it was any time earlier than that, they would all agree. Beit Shammai potrin min hakorban. Beit Shammai does not think that they have to offer another sacrifice for the miscarriage; they just offer one sacrifice. Beit Hillel mechavin. Beit Hillel now requires that they have 2. So seemingly the understanding is that if it was at any point earlier on, they would both agree that the woman needs to offer 2 sacrifices. But here, because it's specifically on this liminal stage of kind of right before they have to offer a sacrifice anyway, and it has to be offered before the 80th day, this other sacrifice, and it's impossible in the case of it occurs right in the evening of, because there's just no time to offer the sacrifice prior to the 81st day. Beit Shammai is lenient towards the woman, and Beit Hillel is more stringent and requires that she must offer 2 sacrifices. Sadin b'tzitzit, a linen blanket. Does it have to have tzitzit on it? It's a 4-cornered garment, or is it just a 4-cornered piece of cloth? Beit Shammai potrin. Beit Shammai says that one does not need to put tzitzit on it, seemingly that they might not wear it, right? It's not an article of clothing. Beit Hillel mechavin. Beit Hillel says actually one must, because this could very well be a garment. Again, hard for us to imagine, but the reality is such that people might have worn also like a sheet as an article of clothing. They wore like things like togas, which are basically the same thing. I don't know if you've ever seen like kids put on a toga. Like pretending a sheep pretending it's a toga. That's exactly the situation here. So maybe we should put tzitzit on our play togas, which are made out of sheets nowadays too. Okay. Jumping now yet again to a different area of halacha entirely. Kalkalat Shabbat, Beit Shammai Putrin, uBeit Hillel Mechavin. Kalkala, it's a great word. It means basket in Rabbinic Hebrew. So if someone has a basket of produce that they are setting aside on Shabbat, meaning that once they do that, again jumping to a different area of halacha, they cannot separate from they cannot really eat it on Shabbat because they can't separate the tithes from it on Shabbat, but it needs to have basically the tithes will need to be separated from that fruit basket at some point. The question is, let's say it's like Friday afternoon, it's in the kitchen, see this basket of fruits and vegetables that one needs to separate tithes from, but it's going to be on Shabbat and I'll take care of it next week. You can understand the situation, right? Things you put aside on Friday afternoon, you're like, I'll take care of it later, after Shabbat's over. Can you snack from that basket, right? You could do some snacking from the fruits and vegetables before you separate the tithes. So Beit Shammai says, yeah, it's okay. You could do some snacking. But Beit Hillel says, no, one must separate the tithes first, and therefore it must be set aside for Shabbat, taken care of on Sunday, tithes removed and such, no snacking permitted. So yeah, Beit Hillel is more lenient because they allow snacking. Okay. Mishnah Nadal, it's really like a whirlwind tour. It's a lot of fun. All different kinds of areas of halacha. Mishnah Nadal nizirut meruba, v'hishlim niziruto, v'achar kach ba'a la'aret. Okay?
Can I ask why they have 81 days?
It's just in the Bible. I don't know it's just, that's, the rabbis got it from there. On the 81st day.
Okay.
Yeah. There might be like, maybe Bible scholars have some explanation, but it's just what it's. Okay. Mishnah Nadal nizirut, right? Let's say one takes on a vow of to be a nazir, right? There's all different kinds of things that come with that, and one could do it for any length of time, but the minimum amount of time one could do it for is 30 days. Okay, so I live in New York. If I take on a Nazirite vow here in New York, the thinking is I can't really fully commit to that vow because I'm in exile. I'm in the diaspora. I'm in New York City. It's, in some sense, it is the Holy Land of American Jewry, whatever, but it's not the land of Israel. I will certainly do things which are adverse to being a Nazir, like I probably will encounter impurity at some point. Thinking is, I take a vow to be a Nazir. I do it for however long I say I'm going to do it. And then I get to the land of Israel. I'll actually be there next month. Once I get there, I then now have to again be a Nazir for a little bit of time because I vowed to be a Nazir even though I was living abroad and I know that I couldn't really fulfill my vow. The next time I'm in the land of Israel, I'll be a Nazir again for a little bit to continue fulfilling that vow. The question is, how long do I need to be a Nazir for? Let's say, I have to be careful, I'm not really becoming a Nazir when I say this, but let's say I was to say something like, I'm going to be a Nazir, don't take me at my word, I'm going to be a Nazir for something like 100 days. I did that in New York City. I get to the land of Israel. How long do I need to be a Nazir? Now Beit Shammai says just for 30 days. You already did 100 days. You got to the land of Israel. Just give us 30 days. Beit Hillel says you got to do the full 100. Okay. So the leniency there is that one does not need to be a Nazir for a full 100 days again. Right. Let's say there's two groups of witnesses that come against me, and they say Elu me'edim shenadal shtayim, ve'elu me'edim shenadal chamesh. So one group of witnesses says this person took on 2 units of Nazirite vows, meaning that 60 days of being a Nazirite. Others say 5. Another group of witnesses, no, he said actually he's going to do it for 5 months, right? 5 times 30. So Beit Shammai says, because the two warring factions disagreed with one another to such an extent, therefore they cancel each other out, and the person doesn't need to be a Nazir at all. Lucked out. Right? If you think about it, number 5 has the number 2 inside of it. So you could just say, let's just do the lowest common denominator. Nazir, Shtaim, right? He should be a Nazir for 2 units of 30, i.e. 60 days. Leniency again being that in this case the person doesn't need to be a Nazir at all. Okay, and now for good measure, let's get some more purity laws. Adam shehu natun tachat hasedek. בית שמאי אומרים אינו מביא את הטומאה, ובית הלל אומרים אדם חולול הוא, והצד העליון מביא את הטומאה. Let's say there is some kind of structure. You got a dead body on one side, and you got open vessels on the other side. But in the roof, there is a crack. And therefore, the purity from the dead body cannot travel to the other side of the structure, enter the vessel, and contaminate what's inside. Let's say there's a person lying on the floor right under the crack. Okay? Does that person basically metaphysically somehow clog up that hole in the roof? Okay? Beit Shammai says no. What are you talking about? Beit Hillel says Adam chalulhu, v'hatzad hayom mevit hatuma. It's as if that the person's like stomach is an empty chamber, even though it has some stuff inside. It's as if it's an empty chamber, and the empty chamber metaphysically somehow creates a wall that goes all the way up to the roof, clogs up the crack in the roof, and thus creates a uniform structure which allows for the impurity of the dead body to move to the other side of the room and enter the open vessel on the other side of the room. Okay? That's the situation. Beit Shammai is more lenient here in terms of how the purity is spread or not. So this chapter, that was the whole chapter. What I emphasized already is that almost entirely this is anonymous, right? We have opinions of Beit Shammai, anonymous in the sense that we have a list of leniencies of Beit Shammai versus Beit Hillel, but it's not attributed to anyone, right? The chapter just starts. I'll go all the way back to the first chapter, the first Mishnah. It just says Elu dvarim mikule Beit Shammai umechumrei Beit Hillel, right? These are the differences. These are the leniencies of Beit Shammai and the stringencies of Beit Hillel. But we don't have the opinion. This list isn't according to a specific opinion. It's not like, oh, it said these are the differences. It's just the Mishnah says anonymously, these are the leniencies, these are the stringencies. We did see that there was one case here in Mishnah 6, right? We actually see Rabbi Yehuda has an opinion about these disagreements in which Beit Shammai is more lenient. So that brings us to the place of understanding that there actually could potentially be many more leniencies and many more stringencies and these differences between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and that different rabbis might have different lists. And that's what we get in chapter 5. Chapter 5 actually is more leniencies of Beit Shammai, but now we have specific rabbis, and we start with our good friend Rabbi Yehuda, we just saw last chapter. And this helps us think again about just the formation of the Mishnah, and that we see that different people are bringing together traditions that are formally related, right? So we have some anonymous collection of differences between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and then someone says, hey, you know what? I also have another list that I'm familiar with of leniencies of Beit Shammai and stringencies of Beit Hillel. So the first one that he brings, he has 6 altogether. Remember, we're thinking a lot about 6s and 3s and the like comes up quite a bit. So the blood of a carcass, dam nevelot. So the flesh of a carcass is impure. But Beit Shammai says actually that the blood is pure. Beit Hillel says that it is impure like the flesh itself. Beitzat nevela, right? So the egg that comes out of a carcass. This is obviously a bird's carcass. I don't know why that made me laugh. It's just like obvious, but it's unsaid here. Im yesh kayotze ba nimkeret bashuk muteret, v'im lav asura k'divrei Beit Shammai. U'Beit Hillel osrin, right? So Beit Hillel says that the egg that comes out of the carcass is never permissible. Beit Shammai says if you see eggs like that, that it looks like an egg which is totally usable. If it's a sellable egg, if you can sell it, you could eat it. But if you can't sell it, you can't eat it. But Hillel says it's never permissible. It needs to actually have been, I guess, what's the word? Laid from the bird itself. Umodim bevetzat trefa shehi asura mipnei shegala bi'isur. But an egg that comes from a bird that is a trefa, that means it was going to die by natural causes within 12 months, is entirely forbidden by all, because anyways that animal would have been forbidden to eat, even if it had been killed properly. Okay, dam nochid v'dam tahala shel mitzorat, Beit Shammai mitzaharin, u'Beit Hillel omrim kiruka u'chemei ragleha. So this has to do with specific kind of discharges. I don't want to get too much into detail about that come out of a woman. Beit Shammai says that they are not actually they're not impure in this case, but Beit Hillel says they are impure but specifically of a certain sense, in that they are like things which are only contract impurity when they are wet. Okay. Ochlin perot shvi'it b'tova v'shelo b'tova k'divei Beit Shammai u'Beit Hillel omrim en ochlin ela v'tova. Okay. En ochlin ela v'tova. Interesting. I thought it was different. Okay. And the 7th year, someone has a field, and they have to therefore make all of their produce available to everyone because it's a sabbatical year. Beit Shammai says you can give thanks, or you don't have to give thanks. Beit Shammai, and then Beit Hillel says you actually cannot give thanks to that person, because if you give thanks to the person who's the owner of the field, that is as if it's implying that that person owns that produce. And if one owns that produce, that's not permissible in the 7th year, right? You shouldn't say thank you for this, because that implies that they have ownership and they're not allowed to own the produce of the 7th year. Hachemet, this is like a leather pouch that one could use to hold water. Beit Shammai omrim surah omeret, right? If it is strung up, it could and standing is with like string or so, that it's properly kind of a vessel. Then if it's properly a vessel, then it could contract impurity. Even if it isn't wound up in any kind of specific way, as long as it's just a vessel, not standing, it could already contract impurity. So the leniency there being for Beit Shammai that they have more stringencies about whether or not, not stringencies, they're more exacting on the requirements that enable the vessel to contract impurity. So that was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion on 6 things, and I assume it means 6 additional things on top of what we saw in the prior chapter. Rabbi Yossi says, another additional 6 things. So as we know, fowl is exactly speaking, also speaking, and therefore it could be on a table according to Beit Shammai along with cheese, even though when right, even though you can't eat it together, and it is certainly meat like enough that it shouldn't be on the table along with cheese. So it means zeitim al shemen v'angim al yain k'divei Beit Shammai. So you got to give truma, priestly tithes for your olives, or for your oil, for your wine, or for your grapes. You could use some of your olives to count for the tithes you are separating for your oil, and you could use grapes to count for the truma, the tithes you are separating for your wine, according to Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel says it has to be in tomin. It has to be not just a specific like organic material, but actually has to be the same exact food item. In this case, it has to be grapes for grapes, wine for wine, olives for olives, oil for oil. Hazorea alba amot shebakerem, right? Beit Shammai omrim kidei shura achat, Beit Hillel omrim kidei shtei shurot. You gotta be very careful when you plant seeds in a field, because you don't want to get into a situation of kilaim, right? That you are growing different kinds of produce together. So in this case, what happens is if you sow different kinds of things within 4 amot, 4 cubits, I guess, in a vineyard, Beit Shammai says once you did that, 1 row is this specifically so in a vineyard. If you had a vineyard and you put seeds within the vineyard, according to Beit Shammai, 1 of those rows is no longer usable because we think that it might be too close to the seeds. Beit Hillel says that even two rows is now forbidden because we think that the kalaim could possibly have spread out to that extent. So kiddush here means that it's forbidden. It sounds like it's made holy. Essentially, what it means is that it has become impermissible to be used. You create a situation which is no longer allowed to be used, and it's 2 rows according to Beit Hillel, 1 row according to Beit Shammai.
Didn't we have in Mishnah Yomit where they had diagrams of what's the best way to plant it?
Oh, they had that somewhere? Yeah, that's a great thing. I mean, in Demai, that would come up.
Right.
In Kilayim and Demai. Yeah, in Kilayim especially would come up.
If
So
you had it on the square,
Yeah.
the square or on the thing.
Yeah, so the problem with Eduyot is that they don't usually give you the diagrams. You have to go back many months. I think even you have to go back a few years to get to those diagrams. You've been around here for a while, Debbie. I guess you've been doing. That's great. Yeah. Hami'isa. Misa is boiled flour, right? So it's not like you're baking it. It's usually usually we think of challah as like coming out of flour that is baked. Here it's flour that is mixed with oil and then boiled, rather. Yeah, boiled. Beit Shammai potzurin. So they don't think you have to actually separate challah from that. Beit Hillel says one does have to offer challah from that. Clear understanding of the stringency and the leniency in this case. Yeah, okay. Matbilin b'chal dalit. So a chal dalit, very weird word. Trying to figure out for a while what the root of it is, actually. I couldn't really think of it, but I have a theory. So chal dalit is when it rains a lot, okay? And it creates kind of streams or so in streets and the like. So I think it comes from like actually it being scary, and like chalada, if you know that root, like from like being scared. So I think that actually might be the root here, that it's like it's so scary how much rain it is, like torrential rainfall. So actually, I guess torrential rainfall is a similar kind of word, right? So Beit Shammai says that you could actually, if there's that much rain out there, you could actually use that like a mikvah. Beit Hillel actually has to be a proper, 40 se'ah large mikvah in order for it to count. Ger shnit gayer alei psachim. This also appears in the Sachem Psachim. If one converts Erev Pesach, like 2 days from now, 3 days from now, Beit Shammai omrim tover ve'ochelet pischo le'erev. One can immediately immerse in the mikvah and then offer a Pesach sacrifice that day and eat it. Okay. Beit Hillel omrim haporesh min ha'orla kiforesh min ha'kaver. Beit Hillel says that no, this kind of impurity that one has when they become a Jew, it takes 7 days to get rid of, right? So 7 days after the Brit Milah is like leaving the Orla, leaving the foreskin, literally. It is like leaving a graveyard, and leaving the graveyard, one person then is impure for 7 days, and the same thing here as well. One person is impure, the person is impure for 7 days, and then miss Pesach. And the question comes up, do they do Pesach Sheni, and the like. There's actually a lot of this in scholarship. Kristen Hayes has written about this in her book on Gentile impurity. And the question is essentially like, what does the impurity come from? Is it from the act of circumcision itself, in the case of a male convert, or is it actually that there is some kind of intrinsic impurity to that non-Jews might have, Gentile impurity, which they have to account for? She comes out from the case actually, her argument is that there's no intrinsic Gentile impurity. We did see again the case of the Nazir who can't really fulfill their Nazirite vow abroad. That has to do with kind of the implied or understood impurity of just foreign lands. And so sometimes the thinking here about the person who converts to Judaism is a bit similar to that. And that's a lot of the scholarship kind of revolves around that question. Is it an intrinsic Gentile impurity, or is it specific because the act of circumcision that the person becomes impure? Again, it's used here, Beit Hillel uses the language of saying one who separates from the foreskin, and the question is that literal or is it a metaphor? Abishmael Omer. We had 2 lists of 6. Yehuda and Yossi. Now Rabbi Shmuel has another 3. Kohelet eno metameh et hayadayim k'divrei Beit Shammai. Ubeit Hillel omrim metameh et hayadayim. The book of Kohelet, it's a complicated book. I don't know if anyone's ever read it. It's a bit of a weird book. Not so sure what's it really doing in the rabbinic canon, biblical canon. And another weird thing is that holy books of the canon impart impurity on people's hands. Fascinating question. The theory proposed in the Talmud is that folks, that is priests, would kind of put their truma, they would save their tithe food alongside scrolls of scripture, because they're considered, they're both holy. You leave holy things with holy things, protected. But then, this is familiar probably to New Yorkers amongst us, there's a problem of mice, right? The mice come and eat the ties and also eat the scrolls, and that creates holes, and that's bad. So in order to dissuade the priests from doing that, they said that scrolls are impure, and then that you would basically have a situation in which they become impure and then they can't eat their ties. Not a good situation. They no longer leave their food with the scrolls. As a scholar of religion, it's a hard explanation for me to swallow, but I haven't thought of a better one. It just kind of seems like such a after the fact reason for this, but it is what it is. And this is a way of saying, essentially this becomes a way for the rabbis to say whether it is fully part of the canon or not. We know it's part of the canon, but is it like really, really holy or not? Kohelet, for the reason the fact that it's just a super pessimistic book, which sounds really weird from the rabbinic mindset, Beit Shammai says it's not. It's part of the canon, but it's not like a full-on member of the canon. Beit Hillel says it is, and therefore, how do they say that? By saying it imparts impurity on one's hands. Yeah, Debbie.
Don't they also have this about shiur?
They do. Yeah. So this, so it seems like scrolls also is a bit more of like an ambiguous thing. Like that is like the but no, but it's also shiur is a bit of a scandalous book, and it can be read not through allegory, and if it's not read through allegory, it's very surprising work. This comes up actually in Tractate Yadayim, and the Mishnah Tractate on Yadayim. This comes up there. They talk about homolos too. They're familiar with Greek writings there as well. Mechatat shesu mitzvatan. Mechatat. This is the water that's used to sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer. Chatat meaning to clean, right? Lechatot, to clean something. So shesu mitzvatan, after the fact, they already have done, right, in the preparation of mechatat, preparation of the red heifer. This is a famous irony or paradox. It makes someone impure when they prepare it, but after the fact, it made people pure. It made people impure, then they use it to purify people. Mitzvah's over. What happens now? According to Beit Shammai, this is actually still pure, but according to Beit Hillel, it goes back to creating impurity. Haketzach, or modern Hebrew, it's usually katzach. This is like a kind of cumin. You see it in challah in Israel oftentimes. Beit Shammai mitahalin, Beit Hillel mitamin. Beit Shammai says that this actually is pure. It's not real food, therefore it does not become impure. Beit Hillel says it is food, and therefore it becomes impure, and also you have to separate tithes from it. So dam yoledet shelo tavla, the blood of the woman who gives birth but hasn't gone to the mikveh afterwards. Beit Shammai says it only imparts impurity so long as it's wet. Beit Hillel omrim mitameh lach ve'avesh. It could impart impurity whether wet or dry. But they agree about a woman who gives birth while zava, while experiencing a certain form of discharge, that the discharge will then impart impurity whether wet or dry. Arba'achim, you got 4 brothers. Shnai mehem nesuin, shtei achayot. 2 of them are married to 2 sisters. Metu hanesuin la'achayot. Right, so if the 2 brothers who are married to 2 sisters died, hare elu cholzot velo mityabmot, right? They have to be performed chalitza, right? You have to just do the act of chalitza, and you don't engage in you don't actually take part in the levirate marriage. But if the brothers who are still alive rushed and married them, they are forced to divorce them. The thinking is that because when this happens, the 2 sisters essentially, technically speaking, could be married to the 2 other brothers, but there is a moment there when they are both kind of accessible or to be married to one brother, in which case the situation arises in which they are 2 sisters marrying one person, which is not allowed. So therefore, the whole thing kind of there's a circuit overload and the whole situation. But Beit Shammai says, according to Eliezer, that there is a situation which this actually is not agreed upon at all. Beit Shammai says, according to Eliezer, if the brothers went and married each one of them, marriage is valid. Beit Hillel says, no, actually. The situation here is that the Mishnah has anonymously, they kind of treats the situation as if everyone agrees. But the Eliezer says, actually, this is a debate. Beit Shammai says that if they went and got married, even though they shouldn't have, marriage is valid. Beit Hillel says no, they should be, it should be. So now we enter a very interesting passage. Akavya ben Mahalalel Eid al Ba'advam. So now he offers 4 things. Amrulo Akavya Chazor Becha ve'arba'at dvarim she'ita omer v'na'ascha av beitin Yisrael. Akavya, we disagree with this list of yours of 4 testimonies, right? This doesn't necessarily have to do with Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Remember, we had this id thing. We have this terminology of witness and testified. So it seems like maybe we are no longer talking Beit Shammai, and this is just 4 things which he said. We don't know what they are. And they ask him, don't say those 4 things. You testified to these things, but we disagree with the testimony. And if you retract it, we'll make you the head of a Beit Din, an important job in the rabbinic court. Amar lehen, mutav li v'hikare shoteh kol yamai, v'lo le'asot sha'a achat rasha lifnei makom. He said to them, it's better for me to be considered an idiot, to be called an idiot all my days, and not to be considered an evil one before God. So that people don't say that he retracted his opinion just for a job, and not because he actually believed that it should be retracted. This has to do with specifically if one has some kind of tzara'at, and he thought that basically if one has a white hair in a certain situation when it seems like the leprosy is coming and going, that it's impure, but the sages say that actually it's pure. The wool of a firstborn animal is not allowed to be used. But he said actually that if the wool, if the hair fell off and he left it on the side, and then later the animal went and was killed properly, in which case he thought that the wool is then allowed to be used, and they said that it wasn't allowed to be used. If there was a situation of a possible sota ritual needs to be performed, he said that we do not do this for someone who converted to Judaism, nor to a female slave who was freed. But the sages say that actually those people can end up being liable to perform the sota ritual. And they say, Amrulo, Maaseh v'chalmit. We actually, there was that whole story about that specific woman, a shivcha meshucheret, a freed slave, Shaita b'Yerushalayim, that lived in Jerusalem, v'hishkuah Shmaya v'Avtalion. And these very early sages, Shmaya and Avtalion, actually mentioned by Josephus, really, they're actually somewhat well known to have existed. They had her drink the bitter waters of the sota. Amar lehen dugma ishkiyo. And he said that it was just an example, right? Dugma is an example. It wasn't really the waters themselves. See, so these are some of the things that he seemingly testified, and it really upset the rabbis. We don't know why exactly, but they said he should actually retract these opinions, and then he'll be made a judge. Viniduhu, and they disagreed with him so much that they put him under the ban. Umet b'Eduyot, and he actually died under the ban. V'saklu veit din et arono, and he was so in the ban that once he was in his coffin, the rabbis went and actually stoned the coffin. Amar Yehuda chas v'shalom she'akav yanitnada she'ena zara nin'elet b'fnei chol adam nisrael b'chokhma u'virat chet k'akav ibn Rabbi Yehuda says, no, this wasn't a kavya. No way, right? That person was such an important person. There's no possible way that this is actually about him. Rather, this whole story we're talking about was Minidu, Eliezer ben Chanoch, was actually this other random person never heard of, Shapikpek b'tarat yadayim, because he did not take the issue of hand purity seriously enough. Ucheshamet, shalchu veit din v'hnicho even al arono, and when he died, they placed a rock on his coffin to signify like how much they disagreed with his statements. Again, unclear. It seems like it's talking about Elazar ben Chanoch, but we're not exactly sure. This teaches us that someone who is under the ban and then dies under the ban, they throw stones on their coffin. Okay, now we're going back to the case of Kavi ben Melel, certainly. In the time of his death, he said to his son, right? Retract the 4 things that I said. Well, how come you didn't retract it yourself? I heard these things that I testified from many people, and they heard them also from many people. Ani mati v'shmoti v'hem amdu b'shmotan. I stood by what I heard, and they stood by what they heard. Avalata, he says to his son, you shamata mipi echid u'mipi merubim. You heard from both one and from the many. The one being himself, and the many being the sages. It's better for you to forego or to forsake the opinion of the one person and to hold by the opinion of the many. So he's saying, even though I know I'm right, you now have an ability to get out of the situation. I cannot stop saying what I heard from the many. You just heard it from me, and even though I think this is correct, you now have an ability to go and side with the many. Give me a good word with your friends. I'm not going to put in a good word. Maybe you found something bad with me. I didn't find anything bad in you. What is this final thing that he says to his son as he's departing? He says, now that you are no longer under the ban, or we are no longer the ban, you could go be a part of the rabbis and the rabbinic movement. I still won't put in a good word for you, though, because what you do will bring you close to them, and what you do will distance you from them. So it should be on you and not on me. You should prove yourself to be a part of the rabbinic group. So interesting way to end the chapter, I should say. Very dramatic, like very dramatic for the Mishnah. I don't know, even doing Mishnah Yomit, not that many such dramatic things in the Mishnah in general. But it's interesting because it kind of gets to the very fabric of what we're doing in this tractate, right? It gets to this whole idea of Eduyot, of testimony. The importance the rabbis place on testimony, even when they think that it is at their own expense, and the expense of actually being fully part of the rabbinic group. And that even when they do think that they are correct and testimony is correct, that there still are ways to get around it. Right? There's still ways to say, well, I'll side with the many instead of siding with the singular. So, okay, that's a lot of material. We're a little past time.
And to be honest.
Yeah, and to be honest.
To thine own self be true.
Yeah. I think the last line, is like an amazing line. Like, your actions should speak for you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to say anything. I think you're great, but I'm not going to say anything because I want you, my son, to prove yourself. Very powerful. Very, like, yeah, it says a lot. I have a theory also about this text. So it's like kind of weird, this like whole thing about Rabbi Yehuda, which I think is like a weird thing why he says it's not a kavya, it's not a kavya b'mahalel, but it's chanoch.
He appears in Pirkei Avot.
It appears in Pirkei Avot too. Yeah. Just because Mahalalel also appears in the Bible as well, that name. I was trying to find exactly, where it is because I didn't plan on talking about this. But yeah, he does come up there. There's some rabbis again who mainly only really appear here. So it was right, I think. Right, so Mahalalel is Chanoch's grandfather in Breshit. We have these two highly random sages, Akavi ben Mahalalel and Eliezer ben Chanoch. And it's just kind of weird how like Mahalalel in Tanakh is Chanoch's grandfather. So that always kind of struck me as well, because Chanoch actually like is a very complicated figure in like his reception in Second Temple literature and in the Bible itself, in Second Temple literature and amongst the rabbis as well. So I always kind of wonder like maybe there was some kind of connection there. Hard for me to put my finger on, but I remember when I first read that, it kind of raised a flag for me. Yeah, but you could think about it. Let me know if you think of anything now or next week. We're already past time, so I don't want to keep us going too late. Pesach is coming. Okay, so next week, I'm not gonna be able to go through all the details because I do want us to be able to kind of do some zooming out. So my apologies that we won't do enough review. But this is good stuff. I'm happy to be able to go through this material with you all. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. As mentioned, we will be meeting again next week, which is over Chol HaMoed Pesach. So please do make some time. So in all of the preparations, please do make some time for this class. After Pesach, Sfira Zman is picking up. Mishnah in Depth will continue with Avodah Zarah on April 27th, also at 8 p.m. Eastern Tuesday nights with Rabbanit Leah Sarna. Signups for this class and more are available on drisha.org/classes. And with that, Good night, Chag Kasher V'Sameach, and I hope to see you all soon.